State of Cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry.
Our top stories.
Minnesota's legal cannabis market expanded with the opening of a tribally owned dispensary outside reservation land. Ohio lawmakers target recreational marijuana law with major revisions. Oregon has legalized cannabis trade samples and wholesale transactions at industry events. A new Pennsylvania cannabis bill proposes a private sales framework.
And now, here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week. Hawaii's cannabis laws are undergoing major reforms. Governor Josh Green has signed Senate Bill 1429, expanding the number of patients that a caregiver can grow medical cannabis for from 1 patient to 5. The measure also retroactively fixes a lapse in caregiver rights and introduces fines for violations. Meanwhile, 2 additional bills await the governor's decision. House Bill 302 would modernize Hawaii's medical cannabis program by allowing telehealth certifications, introducing penalties for illegal dispensaries, and expanding access to accessories at retail locations. It also gives the Department of Health greater authority to manage enforcement and ensure patient safety. The second bill, House Bill 1482, targets Hawaii's growing hemp industry. If signed, it would require all hemp product retailers and distributors to register with the state beginning in 2026. It restricts sales of tinctures to adults 21 and over, and gives the Department of Health and the Attorney General powers to inspect and penalize non-compliant businesses. These bills represent a pivot in Hawaii's approach, expanding access to safe, regulated cannabis while clamping down on the largely unregulated hemp market. Governor Green has until July 9th to decide the fate of the pending bills.
In Kentucky, momentum is building for the launch of its long-awaited medical cannabis program. Governor Andy Beshear has announced a new interactive map where registered patients can preview 39 future dispensary locations. While none are open yet, the governor says some are expected to begin operations before the end of the year. To support early adopters, Beshear signed an executive order waiving the $25 renewal fee for those who received their cards in 2025, noting that many have yet to benefit from their registration due to the delayed rollout. As of now, more than 10,000 Kentuckians hold valid cards. The state also broke ground on its first cannabis safety compliance facility, which will oversee product testing and ensure public safety. Meanwhile, Governor Beshear is continuing to advocate for federal reform, pushing for the repeal of laws that prevent medical cannabis patients from owning firearms, an issue impacting users across the country. Kentucky's program, passed into law in 2023, is supported by a bipartisan coalition and widespread voter approval. With infrastructure now taking shape and regulatory frameworks being finalized, full access for patients could become a reality in 2026.
In Minnesota, the cannabis industry reached a historic milestone on May 23rd, when the White Earth Nation opened the state's first off-reservation recreational marijuana dispensary in the city of Moorhead. The dispensary, named Wa Big One Mashkiki, or flower medicine in Ojibwe, is part of a broader strategy enabled by a state tribal compact signed earlier this month. That agreement allows the tribe to operate up to 8 dispensaries beyond its reservation. Products currently include smokable flower and drinks, with concentrates and edibles coming soon. Each item includes QR code labeling for transparency and third-party lab testing, setting a new standard for quality assurance in the state's budding cannabis market. The Moorhead location was selected for its accessibility to both tribal members and local consumers, many of whom previously had to travel to the reservation for cannabis products. This move not only expands access but also sets a national precedent for tribal leadership in cannabis commerce. It comes as more than a dozen cities and counties in Minnesota prepare to open their own municipal cannabis outlets. Meanwhile, legal and regulatory debates continue, including a pending court case involving tribal cannabis operations on reservation land. But for now, the launch of this dispensary represents a significant step forward, not just for the White Earth Nation, but for the broader cannabis landscape in Minnesota.
Last Tuesday, Nebraska's legislature took a decisive step in regulating the state's hemp and THC industry by advancing Legislative Bill 316. The bill, championed by State Senator Kathleen Kauth, seeks to prohibit consumable hemp products exceeding 0.3% THC or 10 milligrams per package. An alternative plan to regulate rather than ban failed to gain traction. Financial concerns also loom, with state projections showing potential revenue losses exceeding $2.9 million. While the bill exempts hemp fiber and hemp textiles and includes a temporary safe harbor period for consumers to dispose of non-compliant products, many worry the long-term effects will be damaging for patients, users, and the broader cannabis industry. The law, if finalized, will take effect in January 2026, with a final vote expected before the legislative session ends in June.
The cannabis world is changing fast, and the State of Cannabis Weekly News Digest is your anchor in the storm. Every week, we break down the top national stories in under 15 to 20 minutes, helping growers, patients, retailers, and reformers make sense of the shifting landscape. If we've helped you make better decisions, take a moment to like, follow, review, and share the podcast wherever you are consuming it with someone who needs to hear the truth. This industry is growing. Let's grow smarter, together.
Nevada's legislature has taken a step toward modernizing the state's child welfare system. Assembly Bill 107, a bipartisan measure championed by Assemblymember Tracy Brown May, would allow individuals with past marijuana possession convictions, older than 5 years and not involving intent to sell, to become foster parents, work in foster homes, or even reside in them. The legislation passed the Assembly unanimously and received near-unanimous support in the Senate. Under current state law, any drug-related conviction, regardless of how minor or dated, can disqualify someone from fostering a child. This includes cannabis convictions that predate the state's 2016 legalization of adult-use marijuana. AB 107 creates a specific carve-out for these low-level offenses, effectively removing a barrier that has excluded some individuals from supporting Nevada's foster care system.
In Ohio this week, state lawmakers moved to significantly rewrite the cannabis legalization measure approved by voters just last year, raising questions about how far elected officials can go in reshaping popular mandates and what it means for the broader cannabis economy. At the heart of the controversy is Senate Bill 56, which has advanced through key committees and now combines elements of other legislation to form a sweeping overhaul. While Ohioans approved Issue 2 in 2023 with promises of social equity, expanded access, and local economic reinvestment, the current bill pivots sharply. Lawmakers want to impose new limits on THC potency, cut the number of permitted retailers, and scale back long-term funding for municipalities, potentially undermining the business incentives that helped build local support. The legislation also narrows criminal record expungement and eliminates dedicated funding for justice reform programs, despite widespread public backing for those initiatives. A separate provision would ban most public consumption and restrict cannabis sharing to tightly controlled private settings. Adding to the tension, even as legislators are tightening the framework, regulators just approved an increase in purchase limits, allowing consumers to buy up to 2.5 ounces starting next week. That policy shift suggests the market is ready to grow, even as lawmakers look to pull it back.
In a significant move for Oregon's cannabis industry, Governor Tina Kotek has signed Senate Bill 558 into law. The legislation, which takes effect on January 1st of 2026, allows licensed cannabis businesses to provide trade samples and engage in wholesale transactions at registered industry events. This includes trade shows, the Oregon State Fair, and other temporary events that are approved by the Oregon's Liquor and Cannabis Commission. Under the new law, Only other licensees and permitted cannabis workers can receive samples, ensuring products remain within the regulated system. The new law also lifts restrictions that previously hindered business-to-business transactions, such as a 24-hour waiting period for wholesalers. By streamlining the sampling and transaction process, the bill aims to improve product transparency and allow businesses to showcase new products efficiently. The OLCC will oversee the implementation, including establishing rules for tracking and security at events. For an industry facing regulatory fatigue and high operating costs, SB 558 may offer a much-needed breath of fresh air and opportunity.
In Pennsylvania this week, cannabis legalization took center stage, not through a single breakthrough, but through a flurry of proposals and fiscal forecasts that reveal both momentum and deadlock in one of the last major Northeastern holdouts. A new bill dubbed the Keystone Cannabis Act was introduced by a Democratic state senator hoping to sidestep political paralysis. The bill proposes a regulated and privately operated cannabis market, in direct contrast to a previously House-passed plan that would have created state-run stores. That earlier proposal was recently rejected by the Senate, prompting this fresh push. The new bill includes public health protections, equity provisions for communities hit hardest by prohibition, and a promise to generate over $500 million annually in tax revenue. Meanwhile, a separate report from the Marijuana Policy Project sharpened the economic stakes, estimating Pennsylvania could reap as much as $2.1 billion over 5 years if it moves forward with adult use legalization. But partisan divides remain deep. While Democrats and some moderate Republicans support a privatized sales model, others in the GOP-controlled Senate continue to resist, calling for a slower rollout or stricter state oversight. The tension is striking. One part of the government is positioning cannabis as an engine for reinvestment and social equity, while another remains cautious, even as tax dollars leak across the borders to nearby states where cannabis is already legal.
In Tennessee, Governor Lee signed House Bill 1376 into law, which bans popular cannabinoids like THCA and Delta-8, and ends all online and delivery sales, and hands regulatory control over to the Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Beginning January 1st of 2026, businesses must sell products exclusively in person at licensed brick-and-mortar locations. New regulations include age restrictions, product testing, and security requirements for retail display. The law also introduces a 6% retail sales tax and a new wholesale tax based on THC content, which creates a significant financial burden on smaller operators. For consumers, especially those in rural areas or with mobility challenges, the end of delivery and online access may mean the disappearance of accessible alternatives. For patients relying on THCA, which is federally legal but now banned under Tennessee's state law, the impact could be even more severe. While lawmakers defend the measure as necessary for public safety, critics, including the Tennessee Growers Coalition and the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, call it devastating for small businesses and patients. With licenses and compliance processes beginning soon, hemp businesses have until January 2026 to overhaul operations or face stiff penalties.
Thanks for tuning in to State of Cannabis, your weekly cannabis news digest. If you found today's episode useful, follow us, give us a like, leave a review or a comment, and share the podcast with someone who needs to hear it. We'll be back next week with more cannabis news broken down and bias-free.
In Texas this week, a clash over cannabis is sending mixed signals to the national industry. Lawmakers passed 2 major bills, one expanding access to medical marijuana in Texas, and the other banning nearly all hemp-derived THC products, like Delta-8 and Delta-10. Now, veterans, patients, and hemp business leaders are urging Governor Greg Abbott to veto the ban, warning it would wipe out affordable alternatives to opioids and crush an $8 billion industry supporting over 50,000 jobs. While the medical program in Texas would grow under the new law, after adding chronic pain and palliative care, the state would still limit THC content and ban smokable forms. That leaves many Texans, including veterans, caught in the middle. Legal medical cannabis of low potency, which is also hard to qualify for, and a hemp market that may soon be illegal.
Thanks for tuning into State of Cannabis, your weekly cannabis news digest. If you found today's episode useful, follow us, give us a like, leave a review or a comment, and share the podcast with someone who needs to hear it. We'll be back next week with more cannabis news, broken down and bias-free.